Hi, how's everybody doing? My name is Yopak, and I study the brains of sharks, skates, rays, and chimeras, and yes, lost sharks as well. When people discover that I study the brains of sharks and their relatives, you might even be thinking it, especially if you've seen the movie Deep Blue Sea. They usually ask me one inevitable question, which is, are sharks smart? I will head you off to the past, which is this is my least favorite question in the entire world. Because if you really think about it, it's a very difficult question to answer. What does it actually mean to be smart? I think following on from that, sharks kind of have a reputation for being pretty dumb. They're sort of these pre-programmed eating machines. When in fact, sharks are actually capable of an amazing range of complex behaviors, and they have a battery of highly developed sensory systems that they'll use to sample information about the world around them. So imagine their peripheral sensory systems are continuously gathering information on smell, for example, visual information, sound. They're going to be able to detect minute electric fields via their electroreceptors and hydrodynamic cues via their lateral line. So where my work comes in is you can imagine this vast array of sensory information is continuously sampled, and then it's sent to the brain or the central nervous system for processing. When most people think of the brain, if they've done any dissections in their lab, they tend to think of sharks as kind of these small-brained animals. In particular, most people have looked at the brain of the spiny dogfish. If you were to look at the brain of a spiny dogfish, then you would say, yeah, pretty small, fairly simple brain. If this were all I was going to show you, I really wouldn't be giving you the whole story. So brains across these animals vary tremendously in size, hugely different. Now we've got something like the spiny dogfish, which has a smaller than expected brain for its body size, and then you've got others like a hammerhead, which has a much larger than expected brain for its body size. But what does it actually mean to have a big brain or a small brain? You probably won't be surprised to know that the size of a brain, much like ours, is closely linked to the size of its component parts. So my favorite region of the brain is the cerebellum. I hope everyone in this room knows what that is because you have one. So it's right at the back of our brain, which is shown there in blue. Now what a lot of people don't know is that sharks were the first to have a cerebellum. And they have actually been carried through vertebrate evolution all the way to you and me. Another reason why it's my favorite is that we still don't really know what it does. So there is a lot of debate still on the function of this structure. There's a lot of evidence that says this structure moderates motor control. There's a whole other large body of research that says it's involved in prey tracking. But the truth is we still don't know. Now, in addition to the cerebellum, the brain of a shark can be well compartmentalized into different regions, and those regions serve different functions. So whirlwind neuroanatomy lesson for you. Starting with the front of the brain, we have the olfactory bulbs. This region processes smell. We have a structure called the telencephalon. This is involved in things like spatial learning and memory. Mesencephalon, which is implicated in vision. Cerebellum, again, motor control and target tracking. They have cerebellar-like structures, so this is the part of the brain that receives input from their electroreceptors and their lateral line. And then finally, the medulla. So this is sort of involved in maintaining a constant internal environment, and then it talks to the animal's spinal cord. So the work that's done by my lab and my students really asks, can the enlargement or recession of these brain regions be related to where these sharks live and the senses they may need to specialize in to be successful in those habitats. So this is where I work really hard. This is the fun part. We get to run boats and catch a lot of different animals, which is awesome. And then you bring them back to the lab, and that's where the real work begins. So if you guys are interested in sharks, as you've been seeing today, there's a huge diversity in these animals. So we're talking diversity in body shapes, in caudal fin morphology, in diet, and then, of course, environments in which they live. So when we go back to this slide, I think it really hits home the morphological variety you can see in the brains of these animals, and it's not just about brain size. So you might notice the size of these brain regions also varies considerably between species. So you'll have something like a mako shark, really large regions of the brain for vision. compared to something like a hammerhead, which has really large regions for spatial learning and memory and motor control. So what we do in my lab is we try to find explanations for this variation, which naturally brings us to discussions about ecology and behavior. I'm very aware that I spend a lot more time thinking about undersea habitats than a lot of people. I'm a bit of a nerd about it. But I want you to kind of imagine the undersea world like a graph. So if you have increasing depth there on one side, within each of these depth strata, you're going to have multiple different habitats. And in those different habitats, you're going to find sharks. So first, we're going to talk about benthic sharks. So benthic sharks spend most of their time resting on the seafloor. We see lots of Vicky's favorite sharks in the deep sea. We find lots of cool sharks on the continental shelf. We see sharks hanging out by coral reefs, for example. So in the benthic sharks that I've looked at, they all share a common characteristic, which is that their brains aren't really remarkable in any way. So no structure is particularly enlarged. Before you feel really sorry for them, what we've found and we've suggested is that this may actually make these animals more adaptable. So they have found in bony fish that this sort of average brain actually lends itself to being more ecologically flexible. Now we're going to talk about benthopelagic. So when I say benthopelagic, those are sharks that are associated with the bottom, but they spend most of their time cruising just off the seafloor. So this is where we start to see differences based on microhabitats. So first we're going to go into the deep sea. So I want you to imagine suddenly you're going into an environment with extremely cold temperatures, extremely low light levels, prey is hard to find, and mates are hard to find. In the sharks we find there, they have all converged on a common plan, which is extreme enlargement for those lobes for electroreception and lateral line and smell. So what we have suggested is that this is likely reflecting a specialization of non-visual senses in these deep, dark habitats. And this is kind of confirmed as we move out of the deep sea and then head up into higher light level environments. So for example, if we go to a coral reef, look at some of Michelle's favorite species, in the reef sharks we find there, the brain patterns are completely flipped. So those regions responsible for smell and electroreception are quite small. And instead, we see enlargement of the regions for spatial learning, memory, and vision. So the brain really reflects the requirements for living in a spatially complex habitat. Moving out to everybody's favorite, the pelagic sharks. So we've got true oceanics, so those in the epipelagic zone for 0 to 150 meter depth. And then we have those in the continental shelf. We see very strong patterns in these habitats as well, with our true oceanics having the largest regions for vision. So they're living in the most well-lit habitats. They also have well-developed regions for motor control. One of the coolest things, which is a recent paper, we found continental shelf species actually had the biggest regions for smell. In particular, white sharks and tiger sharks had the biggest of any species at that point that I'd ever seen. So in this paper, what we suggested is that it's true, white sharks and tigers occur coastally, but they're also known to make extreme long-distance migrations. So in addition to probably saying something about their smell sensitivity, they may actually be mapping locations in olfactory space to help with this navigation. So bearing this kind of whirlwind tour in mind, my lab's looked at about 180 species. And this data set enables us to suddenly look at species that have extreme morphological or behavioral specializations. We can also be kind of interested in species we don't know a lot about behaviorally. So looking at the brain of animals that are very difficult to study in the wild, suddenly we can actually be predictive about behavior and what they might be doing down there. So I'm going to end just sort of the way that I started. I kind of feel I set myself up with this question because I don't have an answer yet. But if you want my honest opinion, I actually think sharks are probably a lot smarter than we give them credit for. So thank you to my students and collaborators. This would not happen without you. And of course to the New England Aquarium and to the Gills Club for having all of us here. Thank you.